Well, reading the budget is one thing, selling it or attacking it, for that matter, is a whole new thing. The insiders know. Jamie and Kathleen are in Ottawa tonight. David's here in Toronto. Here's where I'm coming from on budgets. My sense is that, in the old days, actually not that long ago, budgets used to be all about what happened after it was presented in the House of Commons. It was all secret up until then. Now it's not so much about what happens after, it's everything that happens before, how you set the table for it. Am I right about that, David?
You absolutely are, Peter, and I think it happened for two reasons. One of which is that there was, by the time the 1990s came along, not a ton of confidence in the Department of Finance's approach to budget making. Projections and deficit forecasts had been off, and there were issues about management of the economy, et cetera. And it was just, the economy is getting too complex for a small group of people in one building to decide what the budget's going to be. So there was a transparency, legitimacy issue on the one hand, and on the other hand, there was more modern, better marketing techniques approached. So the idea was, and the idea has been followed by this government, rather than put together a budget in secret and then try to build a consensus around your budget, build a consensus around your budget and then introduce it. And so you spend a year marketing the budget in advance, and then you just produce what people are expecting, rather than try to sell a very complex document in a herky-jerky way in a couple of days after you introduce it.
But strategically, you also see, as we've witnessed in this past week, the finance minister himself out there giving interviews and statements about what was going to be in the budget. You'd never hear about that, in the past, and setting the table in such a way as they want it set. The issues that they think are the most important, and sometimes issues that turn out not to even be in the budget, but you've kind of set those balls in motion in the sense of the public thinking about it. Jamie?
Yeah, and David is being modest, right? Because he's the one that went with Finance Minister Martin that blew up the rules and actually figured out a new and better way to do it. And that's one of the things that he ought to take credit for and be proud of. I mean, the way to think of it, Peter, is that you can be in the rebuttal business, right? After people have decided what they think, trying to figure out how to persuade them otherwise. Or you can be in the pre-buttal business, and that is to construct the frame through which the budget will be seen when it's read by the finance minister in the budget speech in the House. I think actually this week the opposition missed an opportunity. They were very focused on the elections legislation, and they didn't do their job in setting the table or setting the frame for the budget. They gave the finance minister a great deal of runway to get out and tell Canadians what it was all about. And as David says, the budget was feeding back to Canadians what they were looking for.
Well, Kathleen, that's a good entry point for you on this, because it's always the challenge for the opposition as to how they're going to challenge the budget. I mean, oppositions are there to oppose, so that there's going to be a certain negative tone to it. But how do you go about attacking this new kind of budget strategy that exists today?
Well, let's remember that the biggest disadvantage that the opposition has is they don't know what the government knows. The government knows the facts in advance, and the opposition doesn't. And so that's why you can tip your hat to people like David, as Jamie just has, who actually used strategic leaks in the back to pre-position the budget for Canadians. And he did that very successfully. Just like in any campaign, you want to define your opponent. Well, in terms of the budget, you want to define the budget in advance. And that's what certainly the Martin Liberals did, and what the Conservatives are continuing today. I think that my advice for opposition is that you just got to play your own game, because frankly the opposition is often playing, in terms of the budget leaks, playing with two hands tied behind their back, so to speak. They don't know the same things that the government knows. So that's why the opposition, if they're strategic, they'll figure out their own messaging, have a clear message, and stick to that regardless of the pre-positioning that happens on the government side.
You must be getting embarrassed by all this flattery, David.
Hardly.
Genuine, Peter, as it all is.
Now, David, you've seen this movie from both sides, though. You've also seen it from the opposition side, so you must have learned something from that in terms of how you took the approach on the government side.
Well, I don't think actually that in the opposition side, the Liberals have been terribly successful at undercutting this government's economic marketing over the course of the last number of years. And I think that's because in order to do that, what you would want to do is be out there building your own consensus about what the budget ought to address. That's different from the government, so that when the government introduces a budget, it's a disappointment, not a fulfillment. And I don't think that the opposition parties have really engaged in the year-long build up to the budget the way that the government has, and I think that it's a mistake, because this is the central defining piece of a government's managerial ability and competence.
How much does the 24-hour news cycle play into all this? Because the government has had the ability to set the frame for this story for the last week as we run up to it. Olympics aside, what other stories were coming out of Ottawa? Many of them had to do with what the government was saying was going to be in the budget. By tomorrow night, this time tomorrow night, I mean, who knows? We could be, chasing down another Senate story. It could be anything. So how much does that, the 24-hour news cycle, how much has that changed the whole equation of this, Jamie?
Well, Peter, I'm of two minds on that, because on the one hand, I think the 24-hour news cycles had made budgets de minimis and less important than they have been in the past. We've got lots of research, which again, David will know about, that 10 days after the budget, it's a bit like emptying a teacup into the ocean. Unless you were there when it happened, you don't know that it took place. I think that's particularly true right now with the kind of budget that was introduced, especially with the Olympics going on. That said, the budget is also a very important tactic as opposed to just strategy. It's an important tactic in framing the case for the government's re-election. And I think that's one of the things that, you have to judge whether this budget did that or not. It certainly set the stage for next year, that's true, but it's got to continue to set the stage for the government owning the brand of fiscal, economic, managerial competence. And for that reason, it's important that it not disappear after 24 hours.
That's being challenged now more often than it had been in the past couple of years. Kathleen?
I would say for the vast majority of budgets, once ink is dry, they've passed their best before date, the media stop writing about it, the public starts to lose interest. I would say the only thing that's different than that has been the Conservatives' budgets as of late in terms of their omnibus legislation that they've introduced. Because they've kind of created these multi-hundred-page bills, they've actually given the media and the opposition another opportunity to take another crack at the budget, sometimes months after. Like if we look at the last few budgets, we had opposition talking about those budget bills later in June, sometimes even into the fall with the second budget implementation bills. And I think it's because of the way they've crafted their legislation, which has really hidden a lot of non-economic measures within those budget bills in a way to try to ram them through Parliament.
All right, David, I'm afraid we don't have any time left for tonight, so you're going to have to leave just knowing that your two friends think you're wonderful at what you do.
It warms my heart, it really does.
David's here in Toronto, Kathleen and Jamie in Ottawa. Thank you all. The Insiders will be back in 2 weeks' time.